members of the Indigenous Languages Action Forum, ILA, members of the African Languages Association of Southern Africa, LASA, our speaker, Professor Madiba, panelists and colleagues, Molweni, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Koyomora, good morning. I extend a warm welcome to all of you who have joined this interactive webinar under the theme, Using the Indigenous Languages at University. Why do we do it and can it work? Hosted by ILAF in association with the LASA. Unfortunately, Prof. Khalakhala is unable to welcome you to this webinar given his recent bereavement. We extend our heartfelt condolences to Prof. Khalakhala and his family during this difficult time. Over the past 2 years, we have seen universities from across South Africa adopting monolingual English-only language policies for teaching, learning, and research purposes. Previously taught bilingual courses have been abandoned in favor of an English-only policy practice on the basis of transformation, equal access for all, and redressing past marginalization. We could but only question how the adoption of a language with a colonial history is inclusive and transformative, where the indigenous languages continue to be excluded in our lectures and developed as languages of scholarship. Last week, linguists, forensic linguists, language practitioners, students, activists, and speakers of the indigenous languages were encouraged by the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal, ruling that the monolingual language policy adopted by UNISA was unconstitutional. The bilingual judgment was a step towards ensuring the indigenous languages be afforded the protection and promotion to be used as languages of instruction at universities. It is very timely that we are engaging with this topic during this webinar on the back of this positive judgment. I encourage each of you tuning in this morning to continue promoting the use of indigenous languages and to use the indigenous languages in an inclusive manner in your teaching spaces. I now hand over to Koketso, who will facilitate the webinar. Ngozi.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Koketso Sachane, and I'm honored to have been invited by ILAF to facilitate this webinar. Thanks to you for making time to join this discussion under the title, Using the Indigenous Languages at Universities, Why Do It and Can It Work? Allow me, if you will, for me to share something personal. When I was approached to be part of this webinar, I mentioned to the ILAF team that their invitation and the work that they do as ILAF resonates with a project I'm currently involved in. As part of its aims, ILAF speaks of the use of our indigenous languages as important resources in sectors like education and healthcare. This, for me, fits perfectly with the project we are currently busy with, where on a daily basis, we produce content across all 11 official languages to increase awareness and better equip South Africans to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm therefore honored to not only be invited to facilitate this critical discussion, but I'm also looking forward to listening and learning as to how else I can improve in better utilizing our languages as a tool for education and awareness. As mentioned, the topic for this webinar is using the indigenous languages at universities. Why do it and can it work? Please allow me to share with you the outline for how this session will run. We are first going to have presentations by 3 contributors giving their reflections on the topic. Following their submissions, we will hear from our main speaker. We will then open up the discussions for your participation, after which there will be a summary and then we will conclude. All in all, the entire session should be no more than an hour and a half. Without taking up more time, I would like to introduce our first 2 panelists. They're both going to speak to their experiences with multilingualism at university. To start us off and share his thoughts is Abram Mashatole from the University of Limpopo. Abram Mashatole is based at the university's Department of Linguistic and Translation Services, where he lectures in subjects including bilingual and multilingual education and language and cognition, critical awareness, and language and literacy learning in multilingual contexts. Abram is also a doctoral fellow at Wits University, where his research project looks at complex translingual approaches to Sepedi corpus development. We will then hear from Simthembile Gceketwana, who is a lecturer at the Department of Curriculum Studies in the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. Simthembile Gceketwana has contributed extensively over the years in various research and presentations addressing the use of indigenous languages in teaching, both at schools and at tertiary institutions. Simthembile is a PhD candidate at Stellenbosch University with a focus on the implementing of language policy for multilingual education. Both our panelists have 5 minutes each to make their presentations. Thank you, and over to you, Abram Mashatul.
Hi all, I thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Abram Mashatule. I am a researcher and lecturer at the University of Limpopo. As a researcher, my interest lies in studying and understanding community responses to linguistic, cultural, and educational problems through multilingual resources. So as a lecturer at the University of Limpopo, I teach students who are like me, bilingual and passionate about the development and use of indigenous languages, including how to research and theorize multilingualism. Beyond that, we are constantly rethinking about how renewed understandings of multilingualism stand to impact on issues of policy and practice in the future in South Africa. So I'm going to talk briefly about this experience of me as a lecturer who is passionate about multilingualism and indigenous languages. So at the University of Limpopo, we have a dual instruction program where students access academic content through the medium of English and Sepedi. So this is truly remarkable and demonstrates that choices about languages of learning and teaching are not necessarily choices between English versus an African language, which would ordinarily end with predictable responses, but rather it can actually be both. So I am a lecturer who is multilingual and fully invested in the promise of multilingualism as a linguistic and cultural competence that enables students to navigate complex multilingual and cultural spaces with greater fluidity and more agility. So there is a story to the work that I'm doing. Many children in several parts of the world are generally afforded multiple opportunities to learn and learn through their own languages in ways that reaffirm their identity, in ways that reaffirm their cultures, in ways that reaffirm the ability to acquire knowledge or become knowers. Contrastly, many children in Africa are denied this opportunity. In fact, for them, going to school generally involves entering a space where you get to learn about everything beside yourself, not about yourself, most of the time through colonial languages. So our approach is different in the sense that we are immersive and we get students to learn meaningfully through the mediums of two languages. We thus are open to the empowering potential of indigenous languages, and the feedback has been truly remarkable. Students are responsive to this possibility. We see them through our classroom interactions. They come alive in class. They speak to academic concepts with authority, and they, like me, believe that languages grow through usage. So this is part of our strategy of developing champions who can drive this agenda further. Bringing African languages into the academy open spaces for their growth, for capacity development, for their prestige, and disrupt long-standing patterns of monolingual bias and epistemic violence. And these are central for me, and they should be central for every one of us. So the last point that I want to talk about is about the idea of mass mobilization towards mainstreaming indigenous languages in South Africa. So this is something that I've been always thinking about in terms of what are the modalities and what are the possibilities. Among our circle, there are those who believe that us as researchers, we have to do more to communicate and visibilize our work in the media and society. While some believe that we need more community engagements, others argue that we need to demonstrate practice, models of what actually work. I know we probably have to do all of the above as ELAF and probably do more, but we have to think more deeply about how can this agenda get resonance with communities and political principalities, since little can be achieved without the two. I'm hoping that this is something we'll discuss more in this webinar. I thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. Thank you very much for being part of this webinar. I trust that you are keeping safe at all times. And today I'll briefly share my thoughts based on the theme and my stance on the language matters. Let me start by taking you through what I will be sharing with you today. I have decided on two themes. The first one is the theme of indigenous languages and the manner in which it can, or it has a potential to contribute to the economy. And secondly, I will talk about multilingualism briefly, which I think it's vital considering that in South Africa, we have a lot of migration between provinces. And the people from these provinces speak different languages. Starting with the first one, looking at the indigenous languages, at times we often argue that we need to maintain African languages for cultural or identity purposes, which I think that is very true. And I do think, though, that we need to actually look beyond and think about incorporating the use of indigenous languages for indigenous language speakers to partake into the economy, not just the identity and culture. So if peace building, development, and reconciliation are to be achieved in South Africa, they will have to be done in the language of the people. So I can quote Pra when he says, if people are expected to take part in what moves South Africa forward, they need to do so in the languages they speak and understand. So that's why then I think the issue of indigenous languages is important when it comes to enabling the South African citizens to take part into the economy and to form part into the economy in the languages they speak and understand better. The second part, which I would like to touch on, is the multilingualism in our universities and South Africa at large, because multilingualism is a norm in our country. And it is also important to perhaps start with the language and education policy of 1997, which is actually a basic education policy. But I think it's important because that policy evokes the issue of mother tongue-based bilingual or multilingual education or multilingual approach. And one person that can come in mind who has actually discussed the issue of mother tongue-based bilingual or based multilingual ad nauseum is Dr. Neville Alexandra, where he states that children need to be taught in their mother tongue first, then develop other languages, but by then their mother tongue must be well developed. In my research, I work with English and Afrikaans pre-service teachers, where the idea is to equip them to function in linguistically diverse classrooms. And I find that where there are learners of indigenous languages in classrooms, for example, if we will speak of isiXhosa, they will actually be only looking at using isiXhosa just for commands, for disciplinary purposes. And I'm also alluding to what is proposed by Guzula and her colleagues when she says that indigenous languages are to be legitimized in South African classrooms. And in order for the teachers to use indigenous languages to understand the content, so as a meaning-making tool rather than just as a language to reprimand children. So I think it's very important that those we actually link together, and the teachers then can work better in those linguistically diverse classrooms. I also strongly argue that such legitimization must actually cut across the education fraternity. So those are the two main aspects that I would like to touch on today. And thanks very much.
Thank you very much to Simthembile Ceketwana and Abraham Mashatole for their contribution to this critical discussion. A reminder that we will open up the virtual floor for your contributions. I would like to now introduce our next two panelists. To continue with this informative sharing platform is Masibidi Setaka, a languages researcher based at the South African Center for Digital Language Resources. As more calls are being made for more of our indigenous languages to be used in all sectors of our society, Masibidi Setaka's work includes promoting Sesotho to become a language of teaching and learning in both the economic and social political space. Masibidi Setaka has also represented the African continent at a digital humanities workshop in the Netherlands, looking at how to enhance digital humanities in Africa and linguistically, how artificial intelligence and machine translation can be used effectively for African languages. Masibidi also recently completed her master's degree titled Corpus-Based Lexicography for Sesotho. To conclude the contributions from our panelists, we will hear from Professor Mbulungeni Madiba. Professor Madiba is Dean of the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. On the topic of multilingualism at institutions of higher learning, Professor Madiba has, amongst a range of positions, served as full professor in the Multilingual Education Project at the Center for Higher Education Development, held various academic positions at the Center for Higher Education Development at the University of Cape Town, and served as associate professor for African languages at the Department of African Languages at the University of South Africa. Amongst the honors he holds, Professor Madiba was awarded the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust Sabbatical Award, which saw him spend a period at both the University of Birmingham and the University of London in the UK, as well as the UCT Mellon Mandela Fellowship, leading to his period at Harvard University in the US. As our main speaker, Professor Madiba will present the topic, Stellenbosch University and the Community of Practice of the African Languages. A reminder once again that following the contributions from our two panelists, we will open up the floor for your questions and contributions. Thank you, and over to you, Masibidi Setaka.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Masibidi Setaka, and I'm the Sesotho researcher at the South African Center for Digital Language Resources. Today, my talk will be on technologies for indigenous languages. At SADILA, one of our functions is to provide researchers with easily accessible tools and technologies. Hence, today's talk on technologies for indigenous languages. It is important to note that various tools being developed in the private and government sector. However, today I will give an overview of some of the available tools for the indigenous languages. The first one, I will start with the Corpus portal, and it allows for online searches in the corpora that we have. And by corpora, I mean bodies of text, and this bodies of text or speech. For example, book. When you see a book, the words in the book are referred to as corpora or corpus. And you can also have speech data, for example, having a clip, a voice clip from the news on radio, and so forth. So this portal makes sure that students and researchers can search for keywords in context, a word sequence list, the part of speech, and also the lemmas of the words. The other technology that we have is the National Center for Human Language Technology, which is normally known as the NCHLT Web Services. And these are a collection of about 61 text technologies that automatically process textual data. And examples of these tools are the optical character recognition engines, language identifiers, tokenizers, part of speech taggers, phrase chunkers, and named entity recognizers. The other tool which is available is called the Automato Machine Translation. And by machine translation, we mean a process where a computer attempts to automatically translate a text from one language into another. The Automato Machine Translation can automatically translate sentences, documents, and web pages. At the moment, it comes in 6 languages, but more work is being done for the remaining indigenous languages. And it also has an app that is downloadable on the Google Play Store. One of the tools that are available is the spell checker. And spell checkers are available in all the indigenous languages and usable on Microsoft Office, and their installation is easy. The spell checkers test spelling within the parameters of the standard written variant of the language, and they also have a comprehensive word list. The spell checkers assist researchers and students when they are writing in indigenous languages, so that they can have the proper spelling, etc. We have what is called Aweza, which is a speech-to-speech translation app. This app is used to bridge language barriers in communication. And one of the other apps that Aweza has is called the Aweza Med, whose aim is to bridge language barriers between healthcare practitioners and patients in a way that allows for proper communication between the two, so that the doctor disseminates proper medication through proper diagnosis from the patient. They also have what is called Aweza Ed, which enables accessibility to quality learning resources for English second language learners. Another important tool is the online writing support, which is used by academics, and its aim is to give students the opportunity to receive academic writing support. And this happens instantly because it is online and it is user-friendly as well. We also have what is called the Open Education Resource Term Bank, and its purpose is to disseminate and develop terminological resources to promote the use of indigenous languages in teaching and learning. And these are done in higher education institutions. The Open Education Resource Term Bank also facilitates comprehension, it fosters social cohesion, and recognizes the students' linguistic identities. So it is able to help students with language learning difficulties as well. And some of the projects that they work on is the word list. They also have a project where they work on defining concepts, and they add terminological data, and they also are able to translate this terminological data in all official languages. And these are just among other things that the Open Education Resource Term Bank does. In conclusion, it is important to note that various technologies are being developed, like I mentioned earlier, and both the private and government sectors work together in some instances. And mostly universities are involved in this, in the development of these technological tools. However, it is worth noting that these tools require data to be developed. And by data, I mean text data or speech data that is needed to train the machines. Because without the data, it becomes impossible to develop the tools, because the technological tools that are developed need to be trained in the language that they're going to be applied in. And they also need to give proper and correct outputs. So it is important that the machines, the language tools that are built, understand the languages that they are being built for. For more information on these tools, you are welcome to email me, to be in contact with me, and then we can discuss these tools further. Thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me to come and do this presentation. So as you have seen already, the topic of of this session, using the indigenous languages at universities, why do or can it really work? I will specifically focus on the use of indigenous languages in the lecture room. This question has already been addressed by the previous speakers, what they have shown, some of the examples of what they're doing. But I just want to particularly show you the practical use of this, the indigenous African languages. I won't go into really other issues. This other discussion can come, issues can come in during discussion time. So just a brief, the key things that I just want to focus on. The first one, of course, is the challenge. We cannot avoid that there is a challenge that we're faced with. So the challenge of institutionalization of indigenous African languages in higher education. And then I will really, my aim for this will be to show the role of indigenous languages in South Africa, which has already been discussed and described in a number of seminars, conferences. I mean, the past 25 years, we've been dealing with this issue. But my argument here is that, you know, if we talk about multilingualism in higher education, what we are really focused, my interest is on how multilingual students learn, you know, and my argument there is that multilingual learning for multilingual students is not really what they do. It's not what they need to learn to do. It is definitely something that they live by. This is something natural, and I will show you through my some of my presentation, some of my video, how students do it naturally. So the recommendation that I will be making is that I think the quickest way to institutionalize African languages is to adopt translingual approaches, such as translanguaging. I will describe what do I mean by translanguaging. It's a new term that is, but it has gained momentum across the globe now. It is spreading very, very, very quick. And then I will show you examples of multilingual education that will be taken from the multilingual education project, which I coordinated while I was still at the University of Cape Town. So quickly, what is the challenge that we have? The challenge that we have is not policy. If you look at the language policies of all the 26 universities in South Africa, I think 80% of these universities have language policies, which clearly shows how multilingualism would be promoted in the institutions. So the policy, the policy frameworks, we do have that. If you look at the Constitution, we have the policy framework in the Constitution. We also have the language policy in education. So if you look at the policy frameworks, we do have those. Now, that to me should be enabling. I know there are lots of arguments whether these policies are sufficient, they are necessary, or whether there are sufficient conditions for us to be able to institutionalize African languages in higher education. So my argument is that, yes, these policies might not be perfect. Policies might not be adequate. but they open ideological and implementational spaces. These are spaces that those who are really interested in implementing multilingualism can be able to find ways and opportunities to implement what I call translanguaging or multilingual implementation spaces. So if you can just look at these policies, I'm not going to describe them in detail. You can just really see, I mean, this is not all, there are just a few universities down there, but all of them, as you can see, I mean, English, of course, is there. It's designated as a primary medium of instruction. Then Afrikaans features in some or most of these, but in some of universities, Afrikaans features as a medium of instruction, but in other universities, it's just really one of the language that should be learned or that should be used in signages and other things. But then you've got the African languages, indigenous African languages, which you find at the end. So all the universities, when you read here, except just one or two universities, none of these languages are used as a medium of instruction in rather than language disciplines. So what does that mean? The argument here is that these languages will need to be developed first. So if they are intellectualized, then these languages will be used when the time is right. And we have been going through, I mean, it's almost 26 years now into democracy. So these languages, none of them really have made it into use as a really formal medium of instruction in universities. So that is so my argument is that in terms of policy, this might not be adequate, but this opens up ideological spaces where indigenous languages were never recognized. But at the same time, this also opens up implementational spaces that those who are interested with multilingualism can begin to implement them. So the critical issues that comes from this, as I just started now, it's the theoretical. First, if you look theoretically, we seem to be battling. Policy-wise, I think policy to me is fine. But when it comes to theoretical issues, you know, what is it that is really inhibiting us, stopping us from being able to implement these languages in indigenous languages in higher education or in education across? I mean, you know, even basic education, there are some problems there. But, you know, our theoretical understanding of languages, what is a language? And then what is multilingualism? What is multilingual university? You know, because if you look at the language policy for higher education, what it aspires to achieve, it's the establishment of of universities that are really South African, which are neither English, which are neither Afrikaans, but universities that are unabashedly South African. So, but the question is now, what kind of a university is that? What kind of a multilingual, what do we mean by multilingual university? There is a paper, the chapter that I've written in a book that you can really check. It is in the bibliography. You can see, I mean, I really concentrated on this notion of multilingual university and what it is, what can characterize it, and what do we mean by that, and how it should be inclusive rather than, you know, marginalizing other languages. So all these notions will need to be reviewed. We need to look at the notion of language. What do we understand by language? And then what do we understand by multilingualism? And then what do we understand by the multilingual universities? And then, of course, the challenge is theoretical, but the challenge is also methodological. Methodological is how do you teach multilingually? You know, that we've been battling with that. How do we teach multilingually? What does that mean to teach multilingually? Does that mean using all the languages? What do we do? So I will just show you when we go in the next sections how that can be done. And of course, I mean, pedagogical issues, and of course, practical issues, which are the last issues. How do we practically manage these languages in higher education, you know, in different universities? So let me just start with the tension that has always been. The tension that in terms of language, if you look at the tension that has always been identified, it has always been the tension between English and multilingualism. And of course, this stems from the whole understanding, our whole notion of what we understand by multilingualism. So the tension that has always existed is the tension between African English on the one hand and also multilingualism on the other hand. And of course, the tension here it exists. I mean, if all, as I've shown you that those policies, English is the primary medium of education. And the reason being that African languages have not yet been developed yet. That don't have enough terminologies. English is well developed. English is the international languages. So there are that binaries, which we need to move beyond that. Instead of seeing these languages as in oppositions, we need to see how these languages complement each other and how they can be used in a more useful way. So the idea that African languages are not really developed, this is something that those who were familiar with the work of Neville Alexander, you will understand when you are saying this is really, I mean, kind of, he calls this, I mean, conceptual nonsense. Because he says there's no such a thing that the language is, it's not developed to be used for teaching at all domains in higher education. So that we know, I think we need to pack that. You know, it's not a question of that language still need to be developed. So that approach is mistaken. All the languages of the world have developed through use. There's no way that language developed in isolation. If you use the language, you're using the language, then the language is able to develop. So we pack that idea, that argument, you know, it's no longer relevant. So what we are working now, what I've been doing in some of my projects that I've coordinated, first is to see how multilingual students are using languages themselves. How do they use these languages to learn? And practically, how can we advance these languages for use in higher education? And of course, as I've already argued, that we need to shift our understanding of the whole notions of language. You know, traditionally, languages were seen as discrete, separate entity, or separate discrete entities, that things that can be touched, things that can be. But now there's a whole shift from that understanding of languages, that languages really are fluid, as you will see, as I'll show you later, discussing translanguaging. So there is a shift in our understanding of African languages. African languages are not, indigenous languages are not things. These are resources that can be used in various ways. So now coming to really how pedagogically, how can we use these languages? The translingual approaches, such as translanguaging, which I'm going to describe later, seems to provide us with a better alternative, and you will see how students have been really using this. So I'll just briefly talk a bit about translanguaging, because this is a new, in South Africa, it's still fairly new. It's still a contested concept. People still ask many questions about it, whether it can provide a solution to our problems. So the notion itself of translanguaging, it originated from Wales. And I mean, Wales has got the bilingualism between Welsh and English. And they've also been engaged with the issue, the challenges of bilingual education there, and how to really use bilingualism in education. And Ken Williams did a very, very good study in the 1980s, and then up to 2000, and where he came up with a term, and which coming from the observation, practically how students use the language. And that term, you can see the word there, transute, which is in Welsh, which was later translated by people like Baker to translanguaging. Now, according to him, was that multilingual students, how do they use languages? Usually, he said the multilingual students, multilingual students, they use language to, in fact, there will be something that is stronger language and there's a weaker language. And he says he has observed that the one language very often is used to one language is used to reinforce the other one in order to increase understanding. So students might be weaker in one language with the medium like English, but at the same time they might be stronger in their first language. So one language is used as a language of input, and then the other language is used as a language of output. And sometimes we find both. And then the argument is that language practice of bilingual speakers are the starting point in translanguaging. We are not starting with the policy. We're not starting with just indigenous languages that are to be taken into higher education. But we are starting with the language practices, how students, multilingual students or bilingual, multilingual speakers use their own language in practice. So what have been found now in research is that multilingual speakers or bilingual speakers, they use their languages or their linguistic resources, you know, in a more flexible way to make meaning, especially students. So they instead of seeing language as separate, although you can say English is the medium of instruction, multilingual students will always draw on from their own other linguistic resources in a more fluid way. And therefore, this kind of approach is against, you know, the view that, it is definitely against monolingualism. The idea that you have to use one language at a time, and it promotes the fluidity. And the theory behind language here, the linguistic capacity, is that people don't have, we don't have separate languages in our minds. But what we have here is that we have one linguistic system. And then from this linguistic system that we have, whether you say you speak 10 languages, 11 languages, all what you have is a one linguistic system from which you draw on, you select features. That can be structural features, that can be semantic features. So these features that you're drawing on, they're the ones that now emerge. So that's why we end to say the concept of language as emergent, language emerging. It's not something that really you say, I possess this language, then I have to use it. No, it always emerges. Academic discourse emerges as you are communicating, as I'm communicating now, trying to make meaning. So I'm selecting features that I have from my linguistic. So language is regarded as a social action rather than just a simple system of structures and discrete sets of skills, as I've already said. So that means now language is really, it prefers the concept of languaging rather than language. Languaging is a process of using language to gain knowledge and to make sense and so on. So that's the whole process of meaning making, which is very, very critical in teaching in higher education. How students make meaning, and what kind of sources that use them. So languaging go beyond the conception of language as a code or as a system, as a rule, and so on. So we can get time, maybe during discussion time, to unpack some of these things that I'm putting there. But the key thing here is that students must be able to be allowed to draw on from their different linguistic resources. So we know that in the universities across South Africa now, the majority of students come to universities still having their own linguistic resources that they bring from home. Unfortunately, because of the kind of language policies, the monoglossic, language policies, these students are not able to use them. That means monoglossic, we're just simply saying, because of the ideology that favors one language, these students are not able to use their own other linguistic resources. So what we are saying is that here, students come to universities with different languages and they should be allowed to draw on from those languages, and the policies should be able to allow the students to do that. So if you do that, you achieve two things, critical things that are the outcome of the 21st education. 21st century education seeks to promote creativity, seems to promote criticality. Students who are critical, students who are creative, and also students who are really able to collaborate, work together as a team, engage, all those kind of critical skills of the 21st century. If you are teaching monolingually, you silence the majority of students are not able to participate meaningfully. So when I was at UCT, I introduced a very a pilot project in economics, and the other one was in law, then the other one was in maths. But here I'll just show you the economics one that I've done to show, So the question that I have here, we selected students who are doing first year in excellent program in economics at UCT, the Faculty of Commerce. And then I selected students who are speaking, and then the students who are Shivenda speaking. So these students, my research question was whether these students can use both English and their home language, during as medium as in learning. And in these tutorials, first I asked them to discuss in the concept that we've selected. We selected concept like deficit, concept like opportunity cost, concept like capital, and so those key concepts or threshold concept in mathematics. And I wanted to see in their discussion what kind of sources do they use. And it's very, very interesting. So first I asked them to go online and look at the definitions online. Then we organized tutorials that we were face-to-face tutorials. And in those face-to-face tutorials, then we chose certain concepts that they need to discuss. So first I asked them to discuss the concept in English, and then I asked them to discuss the concept in Xhosa, and then also Chifenda. Now, my idea, I wanted to see whether these students use language separately. But then, of course, I was not working with the notion of translanguaging. It was not yet really there. I was working with language complementarity kind of a concept. It was not in my mind that I was dealing with translanguaging. So what was very fascinating is that when we started with the concept of deficit, when we discuss this, as you can see from S1, the student 1, student 2, student going to up to number 7. So what was very interesting here is that the discussion in English was very, very brief. Very, very short. Students just, I can describe it as when you have a less of something. So I can just play you so that you can just hear that description of that definition.
Example, I said it's when expenses are greater than your income, or when you have less of something than you need or require, and it can also be referred to as a loss.
I think it can also be defined as the fact that when your inputs are less than your outputs.
Yeah.
But in all, it goes with shortage or loss.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. You seem to be having some.
So if I can just pause there, you can hear the discussion here, as you can see from number 1 there. Discussion very brief. They were done with sentences, and you can see this was like the sentences that were memorized. Then I asked them, as you can see from number 5, number 4 there, they laughed. Number 5, I say, now let's go to Isxhosa. You see now, then from there they started to talk in Isxhosa. They were supposed to go to Isxhosa. That was what I was expecting.
Agreement in English.
Yeah.
But then in Xhosa, what do you say? So okay. We can discuss this in Xhosa. No, don't have to say it. Yeah.
Okay, Nani, this Xhosa detain bana. Okay, so ekalen bente more than what you are in English. Okay, this Xhosa nte usebenza imali ude ukhethisele kule mali uyibekile. Kule nto buzayisiklo mali mhlawumbe lo mali uzayisebenza kwinto ethile ne and then wena usebenze ngaphezulu kwale nto ubuyibekile. If ubuzixela uzawuthenga into ye100 mhlawumbe ye-rand usebenze 110 ngaphezulu yabo. So which means
ngoba ke nam ndithe ilahleko.
Yeah, you see here the discussion continued, and I will not play all the videos, all the audios there. I'll just rush into another one where the last one where the argument now is heating up, so that you must see the kind of trans language that I'm saying. When students are beginning to draw on from their different linguistic resources, English and Isxhosa here. So it's very fascinating how they move between the different languages. I didn't tell them to do that. They were just doing that because, to them, that is the normal way of doing. So I will just keep this with this script. So I want to go to the one between I think let me play this one now, where we're talking the difference between loss and deficit, because here they need to apply critical skills. They need to apply, show understanding of whether they see the difference between the two.
The difference between the loss and deficit. Because from my example,
because it's important. Is there a difference between loss and deficit?
I said okay, in Xhosa, like Mzansi Africa, yabo.
Imports and exports.
Yeah, imports and exports. Then yabo, atini, import more.
Yeah.
Than it's like export more than
that's
a deficit.
If we import more than export,
meaning that to spend more than ifumana.
That's the same thing. Deficit singayicala ngendlela ezahlukeneyo. Eqaphela uba siyisondela kwelicala le export ne import. Iyaqaphela kwi export ne dia export ndithenga ngemali yam ne. So into esijonga kuyo pha sijonga kwi rand ba imali ni country ikhuphileyo yayisa kwamanye amazwe yabe yona ifumana igoods ezingakanani ezisuka kwamanye amazwe. Egqibeleni it's not about loss, it's about ba zikukhona.
So you can see here the discussion. How students draw on from different linguistic resources. So there's a whole practice that you see here. This is the normal, natural practice of multilingual students. If you try to force them to only use one language, then you are disadvantaging them. In some of the lectures, at UCT, there was always an observation that Black students don't participate, don't engage in class, they keep quiet, they don't engage, But you see, from here you can see how students really are creative, they're critical, they're engaging, they are arguing. So this is what you want from education. Education that produce critical thinkers. So now, of course, the argument with many people is that now, what is this now? Can this really, is this really the normal economic discourse? Can they write essays when using this kind of thing? So we are not saying that they are going to answer questions like this, but we are saying this is the best way of teaching, this is the best way of promoting understanding. So what this project resulted in at UCT, it resulted in this one. So the School of Economics applied for funding from the UCDG funding, and then we're given funding again to take this to a high level. So out of this project, then they start with another more formal project now in economics, where they produce tutorials which were based now on multilingual tutorials. So some of the strategies, I mean, started really from the project that we had. It was not, I was not the first one. There were other colleagues who also tried multilingual glossaries like Morek, Pakistan before. But this project culminated into tutorials that are more formal, which when I left, they were busy implementing this project. So I just want to play you the video of more formal multilingual tutorials. Also, I want you to observe how translanguaging is used there.
Molweni bafundi, namhlanje sizothetha ngesubject esibizwa njenge-GDP, i-Gross Domestic Product. Umna ndingulonwabo James, ndihamba netshomi yam uHluma Sikelwa.
Molo.
Hello Hluma.
Njani namhlanje?
Ndiyaphila Nkosi, njani?
Hayi ndiyaphila nami. Yazi nombuzo endifuna ukubuza wona. Ngaba wabona izinga lokunyuka kwe-GDP?
Hayi andibabonanga, andiwazi nokuba afunyanwa phi.
Bawafumana kumaphepha se-Reserve Bank. Bawakhupha qho amanani amatsha e-GDP.
Nenzuzo kunye nenjongo mna ye-GDP kuze ndikwazi ukujonga ukwenyuka kwe-economy.
Ndiyayazi ukuba uthetha ukuthini. Ingcaciso ikhayeleka ilula. I-GDP lixabiso le-final goods and services eliyenzwe kwizwe qho ngonyaka.
Kutheni nje uthetha nge-final goods and services?
Ukuze sigcine izinto zilula, i-final goods zigqatyiwe. And then i-intermediate goods zii-goods esikwazi ukwenza ezinye ii-goods.
Oh, okay, ndiyakuva. Ukuba ndinevenkile ebhakayo ikhekhe. Ikhekhe esilibhakileyo esizothengisa sibiza njenge-final good. Kodwa ii-ingredients esisebenzileyo njengeqanda, ibhotolo, iswekile kunye neflour sizibiza njenge-intermediate goods.
Ngokuqinisekileyo, njengobubona, ukuba uzosebenzisa lo maqanda ukwenza i-breakfast, lo maqanda wabala as a final good. Kodwa ukuba uzosebenzisa lo maqanda ukubhaka ikhekhe, lo maqanda sizowathatha as intermediate good. Into esizama ukulumka kuyo yile ngxaki ye-double counting.
Okay, so uzama ukuthi uba i-value ye-ingredients zethu kunye ne-value ye-final good yelikhekhe zonke zibala i-GDP.
Hayi, le nto yenzayo ku-double counter. I-GDP yi-value ye-final good. So ukuba ubala amaxabiso omxube uphinde ubale nemali oyifumanayo ngokuthengisa ikhekhe.
Let me stop here because we'll be running out of time here. We can come back to some of this presentation during discussion time. So what you see here, the language that students are using is a very, very fluid language. At the end of my project that I did first, I asked students really how do they find this using indigenous languages in education? And it's closer. And you can see their comments there. Some students were arguing that the problem that they found is that what is challenging here is that sometimes in number 2 there, the use of what they call deep closer. So they're saying really that's not what they speak at home. So I know there's always tensions between standardization or standard as they're used now, and then other forms of varieties that are being used. So there's always that tension. And then students will say, they found what they prefer under number 6 there. They say, we find, I mean, this singai understand simple cause. So they regard this, what we've been using, as simple cause. And then I regard this as a register. It's a register that is formed by drawing on from indigenous languages, but at the same time, also drawing on from English. So that's what my argument is when I started was that, translanguaging provided us with a better alternative strategy to implement or to institutionalize multi-African languages in the university. Because this is really more or less it reflects students' heterogeneous real life experiences that we find there. And then again, secondly, it also helps really multilingual speakers to intentionally integrate their local and academic discourse as a form of resistance. So what I've seen at UCT, students were using sometimes their translanguaging as a form of resistance, as a form of reappropriation of the discourse, and also as a transformation of academic discourse, as Kanakaraja argues there. And as I said, you've seen, it helps them to put their own voice, to engage critically, And again, you know, when you go further, it is also, you know, provide them, enable them to have a fuller understanding of the conception that they've been doing. So basically, I think, you know, in short, how do we institutionalize African language? So I think translingual practice, instead of waiting to develop African language to a level where we're saying they will be fit to be suitable for use, we use them as they are now. And as students draw on from them, then the language themselves are benefiting. Terminologies is being developed. I mean, we have got many examples where terminologies were developed in the process of using the language. So translanguaging or translingual practices provide us with a better opportunities to institutionalize African languages in higher education. I know it's a highly debatable issue. We can really get into these discussions if you have got any other questions. But if you want to follow my paper, that there's a paper that I've published, as I said, on multilingual higher education, you can follow that paper, then you will see what is there. So thank you very much for listening. I can wait for your questions.
Thank you very much, Prof. Much appreciated. I know that there are a number of questions that have already come in, which we will go through. But I would like to just start off by, if I could, staying with you, Prof. I mean, I mentioned right at the beginning that I'm looking forward to, in this session, in learning a lot on this subject matter, personally, and also I am doing in another capacity. But I wanted to just inquire. It sounds like for us to still be grappling with these important issues 27 years into our democracy, the question that I have really is what happened to us as South Africa in not developing our languages, and in 2020 still grappling with what some of us and I consider to be a foregone conclusion as to the benefits of multilingualism and how it should have been implemented a long time ago. What happened to us?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Kokezo, for that question. Look, it's a very difficult question. If you consider that we democracy for 26 years now, I remember when we started in the 1990s, when we tell people that it's going to take us maybe 50 years for us to implement multilingualism if we don't come up with the strategies. People thought that is not really, being realistic. But I'm telling you, where we are now, we can still go another 50 years if we don't take other strategies. See, if you go to other countries, I mean, if you go to Germany, if you go to France, last year I was in Tokyo, where I did a keynote address there. I mean, you find those, in all those countries, their learners, the students at high universities, they are studying their languages, the Japanese, all this technology they're producing, they're using their creativity, they're drawing on from their own languages. And we are still using, spending a lot of money into English as if the whole world is English, So the cost that we are going to have, like you have asked, the biggest cost that we are going to have is that if we don't really promote our languages, we are going to find ourselves behind. We are not going to be able to develop innovation, deeper understanding of the processes. So for us to really promote innovation, also to catch up on the have. So I think we have to find a way how to promote multilingualism. So if we don't do that, I'm telling you, we are doomed. There's no way that English will result into the kind of benefits which in England, maybe in the US, they are benefiting. We need to draw on from our own resources. So I think that's in short that I can really say.
All right, we've got a couple of other questions for you, Prof, but I want to move on to some of our other panelists. Abram spoke about engaging communities, about the values of language. Sintembile spoke about going beyond the cultural values of language, both of them saying how important languages are for education. If I could ask Abram, and maybe Sintembile, you can ponder on this question as well. How important are the indigenous languages for education? How do we deal with important stakeholders, parents, in convincing them of the value of indigenous languages? If we can start with you on that question, Abram.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely important that as researchers we go to the community more. Most of the time academics are very inward looking. We are preoccupied with our research projects most of the time, and we ignore that we have an obligations to go to the community and talk to them and make them understand, demonstrate models of what works. And I feel like that's an important thing. But we need more, as I've said, that we need more activism, and we need to inspire a generation of young people who will take the agenda forward, who will be champions. So there's a lot of the approach has to be multifaceted, in the sense that we need the creative industry to do its part. We need policymakers to do their part. And we need us as academics, as researchers, and as members of the community to do our part in our different roles in the society. Yes, thank you.
And if I could just expand further to say, we know in South Africa, one of the issues that we're struggling with is parents who consider English to be a language of status, and kids are being raised having not learned their mother tongue. How do we grapple with that as well?
Okay, thanks very much, Koketso. I think I'll actually say two things. One, parents actually, I think they need more. I agree with my colleague as well. There needs to be more sort of going out and actually do more research, because I think one of the confusing things, or one of the notion that seems to be taken, is that parents want to take their kids to school so that they can speak English. But and when that happens, it's always more like they take them to English schools, and the so-called ex-model schools. But if you actually have conversations with parents, you actually realize that it's actually not necessarily English, but they actually always they always say they want a better education. So which is sort of a misconception to think that it's only English, but the idea is that they can use their languages even in those schools to make meaning. And the second part is, as much as that may be the case, but if we look in schools like rural areas, I mean, I'll make an example about my rural area, Exala. If you look in those schools and you actually look at how parents actually take their kids to school and all of that, you realize that there is a value that's being put in teaching their children in indigenous language, and also alongside English. So there's not actually a lot of disputing the fact that English is a lingua franca and it's a language of teaching and learning. But there is also more now saying, yes, also our children must also not lose who they are, must not lose the indigenous languages, because that's also important. So I think there's actually, maybe there are two sides of the coin, that there are those who say, yes, we want our children to speak English, and yes, we want our children to speak Xhosa. But I think those who say we want our children to speak English, then there needs to be more actually engagement and more sort of telling them that the language is a meaning-making tool, and learning more languages is actually better for your brain as well. It's not a matter of you need to know one language. And those are the points that I would actually like to contribute. Thank you.
We don't have a lot of time, and I'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Masibidi, if I can come back to you, there was a question that was earlier on around the initiatives that you had mentioned, and the question being asked is whether those initiatives are being coordinated somehow.
Thank you for your question, Koketso. As SADILA, we try and coordinate these activities that are happening. And we often ask our people who are doing research in the different languages to kind of give us whatever data that they have so that we can host it. But normally you would find that some institutions work independently. But as the South African Center for Digital Language Resources, we work with each and every university to try and make these tools available. And we are kind of trying to be a one-stop shop where every researcher and every academic can be able to get all these resources and all these tools in one platform. And if you go to our website, www.sadila.org, you will notice that each and every resource that is there is actually has been developed by different people, and some submitted their work. So we are trying to host all these resources that are developed in South Africa and internationally as well, so that we can be of help to the research communities and to the academic world as well. And it is also important to note that the resources that we have at SADILA, people can access them for free. You do not have to pay anything to actually get hold of those resources, number one. Number two, what we also engage in is to host workshops in South Africa at the different universities. Teach researchers, teach academics on the tools that we have, even if they might not use them now, but they will have an idea that actually there's a tool that I can use to benefit me in my research. And most of these tools are actually help in terms of time, because doing something manually and using a tool, there are differences there, because using a tool is actually time saving. You are able to do other things after doing your research in the tool compared to doing something manually. So we try and accommodate and try to be a one-stop shop for every tool, so that it can be, so that every researcher can actually go to the SADILA website and you be able to use that research. We are for South Africans, and yeah, we are here to serve South Africans. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Masibidi. Prof, another question, and I suppose this is what we continue to grapple with, how we deal with the fact that languages often seem to be promoted against one another. How do we tackle that?
Yeah, you see, I think, where we are now, it's not either or. I think that is our problem, because of the monolingual ideology that was planted in our minds, is that we started to think of either or. To me, it's not either or, because both are possible. We can use multiple approaches. So, I mean, if you look even the language policy of the African Union now, they've shifted from just working with one language. It's now, it's not either or. We approach different language, French, Portuguese, and the indigenous languages. So this language must be seen to be working together. So I think for us to be able to make good progress, we need to go beyond this binary of either or, to say all this language in education, they must help us to learn. They must help learners to learn better, as I've demonstrated. If it's in the economy, this must help our economy to develop. If it's in politics, this must try to help us to bring national unity, cohesion, and so on and so on. So it's really, we need to move beyond language in competition. I mean, there were lots of studies in the past, languages in competition, languages in what. So I don't think that is the issue now. We need to see these languages as our resources, and how do we enhance our both. Of course, there will be continuum. There will be contexts where you will be required to function more in one language. There will be other contexts where you'll be required to function maybe more in one particular indigenous languages, but we need to be able to work within this continuum of languages that we have. And we have got the advantage in our country. Like I'm saying, multilingualism is not what really we have to teach at school. This is what learners already have. So it's a resource that is available. So we don't really to go back to those monolingual approaches that were adopted in Europe those days during the rise of the nation states. We don't have to go there. We need to recognize what we have.
All right, thank you, Prof. I'm going to read just a statement that was made by Nadima, which goes to another question that was posed earlier. Nadima saying, I now work in teacher education and the language issue is seen as a foundation phase issue. Our program timetables, as in literacy in Afrikaans, Xhosa, and English separately, and then we combine all classes and work trilingually. With trans-languaging modeling and encouragement. Universities need to make spaces to accommodate these pedagogies. We had to fight for the timetable space. And it brings me to another question that was posed earlier on, which speaks to similar matters, saying, would one be right in assuming that when using a translingual pedagogy, that the learning materials could be translated into several languages instead of using English-only materials? I'm not too sure. Abram, would you want to touch on this?
Yeah, I mean, in our experience, you can have a text which is in English, and students can discuss among themselves in English, and they can generate outputs through English. So it's not necessarily about a which language. And for instance, yeah, we can work, both, in different directions. You can have a text which are in English, and students, they make meaning out of it in the way that they are able to discuss and engage with the text, engage with the concepts in the text through their own language, and share that in English. But equally, we can translate the materials into other languages in such a way that makes academic content available through multilingual means. For students to be able to make use of those resources for their own learning. So there are different modalities around that to work around issues of language and issues of materials in a classroom context.
Right. A couple of people just touching on your referencing Neville Alexander, Prof, and I remember making notes on my side as well as you were presenting, and Vivian Joseph saying, we have always known that students make flexible use of many languages, but at the level of oracy, the point, and this is also Neville Alexander's main point, is that Indigenous languages should also be used for literacy purposes. But at the moment, only English is being used for literacy. So what is the standard of trans-languaging when it comes to literacy uses in both English and Indigenous language? The issue must not be dodged by multilingual educationists. Prof?
Yeah. Look, I think, you see, the translanguaging approach, it's not really, the emphasis is not on language. The emphasis is on learning. So as I've said, literacy is not really about learning to read and write. I mean, that is no longer the literacy of today. The literacy of today is the ability to make meaning, to make sense, critical thinking, all those kind of things, skills that we're talking about. That is the literacy of today that will allow our kids to go beyond. So the question is not, how do we go beyond, the kind of literacy that that our learners are doing. So I think translingual approaches helps us, that students should feel comfortable to be able to draw on from the languages they have. And that is what Neville Alexander really stood for. Neville Alexander, always say, if you only teach through English, you are promoting mediocre education. A kind of education that we fought in the past, Bantu education, an education that does not allow our learners to think. Because education really is not just mastering of facts. It's the ability to think. And how do you think in a language that you're not even proficient in? So I think in our approach to literacy, in our approach to teaching in higher education and so on, we need to allow students to be able to draw from those their own resources. So, and I think that's what translingual approaches helps us. And I need also to clarify one myth here. People that think translanguaging means that it's a fanaka law. Fanakalo, you are always mixing. I mean, I speak several languages, but I know when to draw on from one particular variety, one particular resource, when to use across all these languages. So it doesn't mean that our learners are not going to be able to speak English well. In fact, you can teach better English through translingual approach. That's what people are learning now, that you can teach better English through exposing these learners, into translingual. So it doesn't mean that learners will always speak a mixture of language, a fanakalo kind of thing. They know when to use which variety. They should know when to use the so-called standards or academic language, which is, of course, the main goal of education. So we are not propagating here a fanakalo kind of thing. We are saying we need to find means to empower our learners to be able to function in more academic setting, in a more at a high level.
All right, we are out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to go through a point that Esther Ramani made, saying that there seems to be an unexamined assumption that indigenous languages are very useful for epistemic access, for discussing academic concepts, etc. But when it comes to high stakes testing and exams, English is the default option. And this is where the students fail. Trained to use indigenous languages as high-level academic languages. We know that it is only literacy and the use of indigenous languages in academic assessment that is going to raise the status of our languages. If I could just in wrapping, and I will go through some of the key points from the discussion, but just to go back to our panelists, Masibidi, your final words on what has been shared so far.
Thank you very much. My final words will be that there is hope for the indigenous languages. And it is time actually for us to take a stand and make sure that our indigenous languages fill up the gap, that they take up space. For example, last year I went to Czech, and when I got there, I was speaking English, but now the Czech didn't understand English, and I was lost. And then I tell them that, okay, I want to go to a certain hotel. The responses I got was no English for me. To several people I went to, no English for me. And I am saying this because countries like your Czech Republic, their Google is in Czech. They go to Facebook, is in Czech. Their Microsoft is in Czech. Like almost all these technological developments are in the languages that they understand. I think it is important for us to take note of that, and most importantly, to understand that our languages can also be languages of teaching and learning, especially in this in this digital era, that we can use the different technologies to actually make sure that our languages assume the same status as the other big languages, that we actually do invest in so that they can be languages used in our economic and social arenas. Most importantly, the new generation, we are using technology. By using African languages, indigenous languages for these technologies, we are actually attracting the new generations to actually come and explore the different career paths in language technologies, the different scopes of working with your social media, Facebook and things like that, but in the African languages. That way we are saying African languages, indigenous languages of South Africa, they matter, and it is time for us to take a stand and work on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Masibidi. A number of people who have asked for Masibidi's web address, Ilaf will send it out afterwards. Ilaf also could arrange a seminar focusing entirely on Sadila and related electronic tools. But Abram, and we are very much out of time, but if you could, your final words, please, if you could try and keep it short, and then we'll come to Sintembile and end off with the Prof.
Yeah, thanks a lot for Ilaf for taking these initiatives. I think for me, I feel like it contributes towards that mass mobilization we need, towards mainstreaming conversations about indigenous languages and their roles in South Africa. So we need to strengthen this kind of initiatives and reach out to the communities and draw them into the conversation. I feel like this is a powerful stance, and we probably need to do more of this. Thanks to all the participants and all the ideas which were shared. I hope that we rethink about them going forward.
All right, thank you very much. Ntembile?
Thanks very much, colleagues. I think for me, one of the things that Prof. Madiba also touched on was the fact that literacy is about thinking as well. I mean, you need to actually enable those who go through the education system to think by the end of it. But I think also it's important to think and create. I always say, imagine where we can produce a professor who can do coding in isiXhosa or in isiPedi. So I don't think we should speak now, but we also need to, by the time we like go to 2030, we have such people who can actually do coding in isiXhosa. Then I think for me, that will be where we are actually heading. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much, Ntembile. Prof, in conclusion.
Yeah, no, let me conclude by thanking ILAF for inviting me to speak on behalf of COPAL. COPAL is the community of practice for African languages. It is hosted by USEF, University of South Africa. So there is a lot of work that universities are doing to promote multilingualism. See, what really I like now, what is happening is the bottom-up processes, that there are more people who are now promoting policies from below, and that's what we want, going forward. And the SSCC have just indicated that I think our goal is that if we can produce capacity from higher education, people who are able to function multilingually in none other than language disciplines. So these are the future. These are people of the future that will help us to really bring the benefits of multilingualism to the community. So I think we really need this kind of all structures that are in the country to work together so that we are able to have the kind of efforts that can really bear fruit. So I really want to thank you for that. And we will continue with ILAF. We will work with ILAF from COPAL and other structures so that we are able to promote multilingualism to the high level. So thank you very much for this session. And thank you for all the people who have come to attend this webinar.
Thank you very much, Prof. Of course, there are a number of questions that are coming through right now as we speak, and unfortunately we are out of time. But there is a consideration from ILAF's side looking at possibly arranging an online workshop to go into translanguaging issues in more depth. And people, if you've got those who have questions still, which I'm sure we can share with our panelists for further or continued conversation around these matters that have been raised. You can email it, your questions and also suggestions for seminars to admin@ilaf.co.za. That is admin@ilaf.co.za. But just in conclusion, a couple of points that have been raised, which we do need to reflect on. We know that, of course, culture is important, but we need to go beyond that. The use of indigenous languages for educational purposes. There are also a couple of issues, prohibiting us. English, of course, we know is a dominant language, and the idea that indigenous languages can't be used academically or intellectually, as mentioned, is conceptual nonsense. To quote Neville Alexander, languages developed throughout the use across the world. The use of translingualism to institutionalize African languages in the lecture theatre, inclusive multilingualism. And also we have to look at how without using our languages, we won't be innovative. We will fall behind. English will not give us the benefit we have in the US or the UK. We have to draw on our own resources. And a point that we dealt with right at the beginning, the need for more activism and parents who will be champions of indigenous languages. And there is a difference between learning to speak English and becoming English. Multilingualism is definitely advantageous. So I think we can wrap it at that and acknowledge that the conversation does need to continue. And as mentioned, questions that you might have that we were not able to deal with because there are so many, you can email them to admin@ilaf.co.za and we can share that with our respective panelists. Thank you very much again to Abram, thank you to Masibidi, to Sintembile, thank you to the Prof, and to Ilaf as well. Thank you very much for allowing me to sit and learn and listen. And I look forward to the next webinar where we're able to engage further. Thank you very much.